For Relay FM, this is Upgrade, episode 520 for July 8, 2024. Today's show is brought to you by Squarespace and Uni Pizza Ovens. My name is Mike Hurley, and I have the pleasure of being joined by Jason Snell. Hi, Jason.
Mike, the 520 error occurs when the Origin web server initiates a connection, but fails to finalize the request.
It's very sad. I have a Snell Talk question for you.
Okay.
It comes from Braden, who wants to know, Jason, on a previous episode, you discussed your home weather widget and mentioned you had a home weather station. Can you tell us more about your weather station? Was it a custom build, or did you buy the sensors as part of the bundle? So for new listeners, this is the potentially annual breakdown of Jason's weather station. Summer of fun.
Yes. Summer of fun. Thank you. Currently, only 58 degrees out there Fahrenheit. It's chilly morning.
And you know that.
Today.
You know
I know that. And that's right outside. In fact, so I wrote about that this week on Mastodon. I don't think I posted anything about it, but I did post a gist of my Scriptable widget. So I use the excellent Scriptable app, which lets you, among other things, write widgets, iOS widgets in JavaScript. And I took a couple of widgets that I liked that were doing slightly different things that were posted about in the Automators forum, and I updated them all a bit and got them to work with my weather station, and that was great. But over the weekend, I realized I could. What I did was, it was 80 degrees outside, and my weather widget on my iPhone in standby mode in the kitchen said 68 degrees, and that was like really, really wrong. And it showed how the relying on non-local sources for temperatures here in our weird Bay Area microclimate was a bad idea. So I updated the Scriptable widget to support standby, which it's a small widget blown up, and I had to do a couple of tweaks. But now it actually shows the current, my phone in standby is showing the data from my weather station, as well as forecasts from Apple Weather, from WeatherKit. So that was great. And I've done a lot of this where basically, to talk about the software side first, I have an app that's a very old but continues to be updated Mac app called WeatherCat that talks to the weather station and pulls down the data and then generates a web page with it. And I'm also generating a bunch of JSON and some other feed stuff with it too. And then I got a bunch of scripts that run on my Mac Mini server that do, like, I've got Python scripts that do some charting. It's a whole thing that I've built up, because you don't have to do that. You can just use my weather station comes with a web page you can look at that shows current status. But like, I really like that I've got a database with all the data, and it generates stats all time and stuff like that. And then my scripts parse the data file and do stuff with it and generate charts. It's fun. It's like a little hobby. On the 4th of July, is when I did this thing, and it was like, well, it's a holiday today, so I don't have to do work. Instead, I'm going to edit some JavaScript. Whee! Oh, so exciting. I don't like JavaScript, but I did it. It worked. So that's the software side. We'll put some links in the show notes of some of my stories on 6 Colors about it. The weather station, in fact, we'll put a link in the show notes to the story I wrote when I decommissioned my old weather station after 17 years on the job. I put it in 2004. It lasted until 2022, where it finally sort of like, I replaced a bunch of parts, but it really just kind of was like falling apart and at the end of its life. And so and they had updated it over time, but like, because the internet wasn't really a thing and Wi-Fi was barely a thing, and it was using like a serial port, so I had to have an adapter and I had to connect it. And over the years I updated it, but it was still kind of really old tech, 90s tech essentially. So in 2022, I updated it, and because that original station was a Davis Vantage Pro, I decided I would buy another Davis weather station. The Davis weather stations are a little bit more, they're a little bit extra in terms of what they are and also in terms of what they cost. There are lots of really nice, simple weather stations that you can get from like NetAtmo and places like that. But I got the Davis Vantage View this time, which is a little cheaper. Some of the sensors that are on the Vantage Pro I never really used and didn't really care enough to pay more money for. And the nice thing about the Vantage View is it's more modern. They've built a modern thing on the inside I have on my network that basically is the wireless receiver, because it's completely wireless. It's solar powered. And then this little box sits in my house attached to my network and receives the data from that. And then everything else talks to the data. So Vantage View. And I do not have the console because I got rid of the console. They sell you a very 70s, almost 80s, I guess, looking console that that has like little like LCD number readouts on it and stuff. But I have that for the old one, and it's unnecessary. So the new one is entirely just like, if you want to look up the temperature, look on the internet, or many devices that I've got on my, at my house to do this in a bunch of places. But I love it. It's great. And if for nothing else, then I know exactly what the temperature is outside, and I don't get in a situation where it's 68 degrees or 68 degrees, and then you step outside and it's actually 80 degrees. No, I don't like that. Not at all.
No, thank you. Thank you so much to Braden for sending in that question. If you would like to send in a question to help us open a future episode of the show, remember we are looking for, and thank you to everybody that is sending in summer-related, warm-related, warmth-related, anything kind of questions for Snell Talk. Just go to upgradefeedback.com and you can send in your Snell Talk question.
I just want to point out that Snell Talk was built to get me to not talk about the weather.
Yeah, well, it was to stop
you,
the small talk was the idea.
I know,
right?
yes, but it was mostly about, it was a lot of weather talk in the small talk.
Sure was. We're going to let you get it once a year,
Thank you. That was my day in the sun, or the fog, as it turns out.
Indeed. How was your 4th of July, Jason Snell? Did you have a nice time?
Oh, have we left Snell Talk and we're just talking now?
Yeah. Well,
okay.
We're following up from last week where we spoke about the fact that 4th of July was coming. Now 4th of July has happened. We're following up on that.
Thank you.
It's now the 8th of July, so we can follow up on the 4th.
Really, everything related to calendars technically is follow-up.
Yes, correct.
Great. It was lovely. It was a hot day. We had a bit of a heat wave. Sorry for the weather talk. A bit of a heat wave. Although where we live, it doesn't get that hot. Even when it gets hot, it doesn't get that hot. And so we, I fixed a weather widget just for fun, recreationally. We walked the dog, read the book, sat outside, because it was a nice warm day. And then we cooked on the grill because we didn't want to cook inside because it was a warm day. And we had set up, we got stuff the day before so that we could do a proper 4th of July. So we had burgers, we had grilled zucchini, and we had grilled corn, because you can you soak ears of corn for a couple hours, and then you can actually just put them on the grill for about 20 minutes, and they kind of steam cook themselves. And then we ate it outside. I actually, another thing I did, our outdoor table hasn't gotten a lot of use this year so far, and I got the power washer out and washed it down, and so we got to eat at the table outside. It was very nice. It was lovely. That was what we were going for 4th of July, and then that was it. It was just pretty simple. But our son's home, so it was the three of us got to have our dinner together outside, and it was great.
Sounds lovely.
How was your 4th of July, Mike?
Good, actually. We effectively appointed a new government.
Right. Oh, that's right. It was election day.
Yeah, pretty busy 4th of July over
here
in England. Or in the United
Great day for Keir Starmer, bad day for Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, bad day for all Conservatives, really, if you think about it. But yes, we have we effectively installed a new government, which seems like it's harder and harder to do these days, but we were able to manage it.
Good job.
Congratulations to everybody involved. It's been an exciting week in the UK. It's fun, actually. It's a lot of fun. I have some follow-up. Bradley and Josh wrote in regarding the Upgrade American quiz. Bradley says, this is the Upgrade American quiz started in Snell Talk. We had a few questions in Snell Talk, and then continued in Upgrade Plus last week. Go to getupgradeplus.com and sign up if you want to. Bradley says, I think there may have been an error. The longest river in the United States is the Missouri River, not the Mississippi River. I'm a hydraulic engineer who works on on Mississippi River projects for both navigation and environmental purposes. I do a decent amount of public outreach for my job as well, and the Missouri River being the longest is always a fun bit of trivia I try to work in for audience participation. And Josh says, People disagree as to whether the Missouri or the Mississippi is the longest river, but according to the USGS, whatever that is, the Missouri
United
River,
States Geological Survey,
thank you, comes out ahead by 200 miles, totaling an impressive 2,540 miles from source to mouth.
I, for one, cannot believe that people are doubting the accuracy of an apparently AI-generated quiz posted to a website as SEO spam that I found in a rudimentary Google search that involved many repeated questions, some questions that were clearly wrong that I skipped, some questions that included the answer in the question, and when somebody on the Discord said I was disappointed because every answer was A, I had to go look because I didn't disbelieve them initially. I thought, well, that would be just like that quiz to also have every right answer be A. It's not true. Their right answers came from all the different letters, and it was, if anything, C was a little oversubscribed.
They weren't all necessarily correct.
But they weren't. They weren't. So I think, Mike, I think emotionally the Mississippi River is the heart of America, and that's why that question was wrong. So there you go. Well done. I think you still got it right, emotionally, spiritually. So good job.
Well, according to the quiz, I got it correct, and that's kind of all that matters.
That's what I think. That was my feedback to Bradley was, I think the point is that the answer in the quiz is the answer you need to give, right? Like, It doesn't matter if it's wrong.
No,
that was the answer.
Yes.
So you correctly answered the quiz, if not the correct answer.
My points don't change, but the provenance of those questions is maybe to be doubted.
You can hang on to those points.
I will. I did. I was very proud of myself. I think I did well.
Mm-hmm.
William wrote in to say, Ming-Chi Kuo's suggestion that the infrared cameras in AirPods are being meant for spatial audio is not entirely nonsense. Currently, AirPods use accelerometer data to determine the user's head position. Slight inaccuracy in the sensor data over time accumulates, leading to gradual shifts that must be corrected. It also works poorly in cars, trains, planes, etc. Infrared cameras would allow them to calibrate the accelerometer readings against fixed objects nearby. I have actually experienced what William is talking about, where I've been using spatial audio and have turned my head for too long. Maybe I was looking at something and watching something on my iPad.
And it recenters.
And you feel it shift. Like, you can feel it shift to say, well, that's not right. But obviously the accelerometer is getting confused. So I think...
No, that's not it. That's not it. What's happening is it doesn't know, and it may have drifted over time. And so if you settle in a new sort of standard position, at some point it infers from that is forward. And then it recenters.
Yeah. That was kind of what I meant, but I poorly explained it. Right. So this is interesting, as maybe they will use it for that. But again, I think William's making a great point, but I still think we can go back to what we were talking about. That the idea that this is to be used for the Vision Pro specifically still seems weird to me.
Yeah, I appreciate William's phrasing here isn't entirely nonsense.
Yeah.
It's not. And I'm aware of the recentering kind of system. First off, the Ming-Chi Kuo report was, how will the Vision Pro be able to do spatial things? And it's it's got 1 million sensors on it, so that might be one way. But my larger point was, even if we take Vision Pro out of it and we say just AirPods in general, my argument is I don't see how you need to add a camera just to make it slightly better.
Correct.
It's good enough. And the cost of adding an infrared camera...
of a feature to go to the lengths of adding an infrared camera on the AirPods. It's too much. It's way too much.
I just don't think it's worth it just for that described case. And certainly not for the case of how will the poor Vision Pro know which way is up, because it does. It's got lots of ways to do that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Richard wrote in to say, an infrared camera in the AirPods could be inward-facing and could monitor temperature of the human body, which I thought was an interesting idea.
That's true. I think that's an interesting thought, that the infrared camera is actually the inside camera. And this came up, I think you guys on Connected may have been talking about this. A podcast I listened to last week, I'm not sure, was talking about AirPods and the phrase, maybe it was ATP, the phrase, there's not a microphone on the inside came up. And I thought, well, there is a microphone on the inside of AirPods. That's how it does its noise canceling. It's not just noise canceling the outside. It's actually listening to what happens on the inside and then adjusting based on that. It's
gross.
Wild, but it does it. It's listening to your ears.
So the AirPods are reading my mind.
But if could this be the actually hiding in plain sight, the much suggested your AirPods are going to start monitoring health data feature? Maybe. It's possible. I don't know enough about whether about this particular part, infrared camera. Is this a cheap, expedient way to measure temperature, or is there a cheaper, more expedient way to measure temperature? Given that they need to look down the ear canal, maybe this is the way they do it. I don't know.
Who knows?
I don't know.
Somebody
I don't
knows.
know.
But
Somebody
we don't
knows.
need to know.
Yeah. No, we don't know.
Apple's F1 movie is going to be called F1. It had previously
Great
been
title.
untitled, and they're using the Formula One logo, which is very intriguing to me. They've also released a trailer of the movie, which I thought looked also interesting. The thing that I was most drawn by is the high quality imagery of being mounted to a Formula One car. And it's answered a question. They've since answered a question that I had. This movie was shot in IMAX and will be shown in IMAX, which is what I was hoping would happen, because it felt like that was the right approach for this movie. It's starting to feel like to me that this may be Apple's first actual attempt at truly releasing a movie. They've dabbled, I feel like, with Napoleon and Killers of the Flower Moon, where they felt like somewhat limited releases. But if they're really going to go and do this on IMAX and premium format theaters, that this feels like more of a concerted effort to release this movie widely, which I think is the right move for it.
Napoleon and Killers of the Flower Moon were also sort of awards bait.
Yeah.
And you were appeasing the directors in order to give them a theatrical release. And what this feels like is Apple is releasing what is essentially a blockbuster. And they want it to do really well in theaters. And that feels different than saying to Ridley Scott and Martin Scorsese, yes, we will give you a theatrical release.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a very, very good point, right? Because this this probably isn't going to win any awards. I don't know if that's what this is for. Could win, maybe a special effects award or something like that. Who knows? And we've been talking a lot about Vision Pro hand controllers, and a selection of listeners sent this link in to us. There is a startup called Surreal that is making a set of hand controllers that is focused to work with the Vision Pro to improve gaming and experiences with the headset. But to get these to work directly, the primary way would be that a developer would have to integrate the Surreal SDK into their app. There's also a way to connect it to a Windows PC and do a whole thing with streaming, but the idea would be, as a game developer, you would integrate the Surreal SDK into your app as a controller option, and then you would be able to use their hand controllers, which look pretty nice. I mean, they look very, very influenced by the Oculus controllers, along with your Vision Pro.
Yeah, I got this from a lot of people, and it's unclear how many of them sort of thought, well, here you go. But as I said to several of them, the problem is it's not from Apple. So game developers aren't going to flock to Vision Pro now with their things that require that level of integration with a hand controller and build them to an API that supports a single company's product. Which is what this is. So this feels very PR stunty to me. And their fallback is that they have an app, that works with Steam on a PC to let you play Steam games on the Vision Pro and use their controllers. And I don't know. I'm glad this product apparently is going to exist if it doesn't already. But the solution is, there needs to be an SDK for this
controller
from
kit
Apple
or something.
There needs to be support in Vision OS for hand controllers, so that multiple third parties can make hand controllers, and app developers just have to support the API and then let it work itself out, right? Apple doesn't have to build it even. Apple just needs to build the API and then let it happen. Let the App Store happen. Let the controllers come out. Let anybody who's building controllers be able to say, we're going to support Vision Pro. That's where it needs to go. So this is interesting, but it feels very much like
too many hurdles.
We've got a solution. Yeah,
Way too many.
It's I don't envision this changing the world. So yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. Whether you're starting out or managing a growing brand, you can stand out from the crowd with a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell your products, services, or even the content you create. Squarespace has got everything you need all in one place, all on your terms. I have been a huge fan of Squarespace for like 15 years. I have been using them forever. And of course, as well, I one of the things I love about Squarespace is how they support podcasting. I mean, Relay FM is in its 10th year this year, and they have been a sponsor of Relay FM shows every month for 10 years. So we thank Squarespace for that. And we love Squarespace because they make incredible tools. If you're looking to get started online, or if you have a friend or an organization that you're a part of or a family member that needs to build a website, Squarespace is fantastic. It's super simple to get started with a personalized website thanks to their new guided design system, Squarespace Blueprint. You choose from a professionally curated layout with styling options to build a unique online presence from the ground up, tailored to suit your brand or business and optimized for every device. Then you easily launch your website and get discovered with fast, integrated, optimized SEO tools so you show up more often to more people growing the way that you want to. Selling things on Squarespace is incredibly easy. You can sell physical goods and they have all of the integrations you need to make it a breeze, but you can also sell your content too. They have all of the tools that you need to sell exclusive content on your site by adding a paywall to sell content or courses. You can even sell files that your customers can download like PDFs, music, or ebooks. So if you've got a book you want to sell, you can do it directly on your Squarespace website. You can also integrate flexible payment options to make checkout super seamless for your customers. They have simple but powerful payment tools. You can easily accept credit cards, PayPal, and Apple Pay, and in eligible countries offer customers the option to buy now and pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay. Go and check this out for yourself today. Go to squarespace.com, sign up for a free trial. You can build your entire website and see how Squarespace is going to work for you and your business. Then when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/upgrade to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. That's squarespace.com/upgrade when you decide to sign up to get 10% off your first purchase and show your support for the show. Our thanks to Squarespace for their continued support of this show and all of Relay FM. It's time to lawyer up.
Oh, yes. Clunk, clunk.
Clunk, clunk. There it is. Another storm is brewing between friends of the show, Epic and Apple.
love a brewing storm. I love it.
Here we go. Here we go again. This time over Epic's alternative app marketplace. Essentially, to now, here's what's happened. Epic went public with the fact that Apple has rejected the notarization of the Epic Games Store on 2 occasions, because the design of the install buttons for the applications, that are inside the marketplace, Apple said it was too similar to the design of Apple's Get button in the App Store, as well as Epic's labeling of in-app purchases looking too similar to Apple's. After Epic went public with this, the next day, Apple approved a previously rejected notarization. They say, oh, no, this one is fine, even though they previously rejected it for these reasons. But they have said to Epic that this rejection is temporary, and they expect the buttons to be changed. Epic have said that they are sharing screenshots of their store with EC regulators. They have chosen to not publicly show the screenshots. What's your take on this?
Okay. Look, Epic does a lot of stuff. I think Epic is often a jerk. I think Tim Sweeney is a jerk. But it doesn't mean they're wrong. Right? It doesn't mean they're wrong.
A broken jerk is right twice a day.
Twice a day, but only twice.
Only
and they're kind of jerks about it. They're just kind of jerks about it. So, look, we don't know what those look like. We don't know. I think it was Ryan Jones, developer of Flighty, who actually asked Tim Sweeney, like, can you post the screenshots? And they're like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to play that game. And he's like, and Ryan Jones' answer was something like, I'm just asking because Apple's complained about that stuff with my apps too. It does happen. I think the challenge here is they're using the notarization process for external apps to do it. And I know, like, John Gruber wrote a post who was like, who are we going to trust? Like, Epic is notably untrustworthy. And then there's Apple, which is like, well, yeah, but there have been a lot of issues with Apple's behavior, especially regarding the EU, especially regarding alternative app stores.
Particularly call Apple trustworthy when it comes to
the
accepting
not on this
and
issue
rejecting of applications.
And I think that Apple, it's not quite politicizing, but Apple making notarization something other than a security check and making it a place where they're enforcing other policies is bad. I'll put it that way. I think you are turning something that is meant to be essentially neutral, essentially just let's make sure this follows some very specific rules so people aren't harmed, but we're not interceding as a gatekeeper. We're more just checking things out as a platform owner. It requires Apple to think of itself as a platform owner and not as a gatekeeper. That's sort of the deal there. And that's why it's allowed by the EU. They're like, this is if the EU allows the notarization step, it's because the notarization step is not being used to be a gatekeeper, right? Otherwise, they won't allow it. Otherwise, they'll say you can't notarize apps. And that has restrictions, that has problems because it is a security measure. So what makes me mad about the situation is Apple is taking a security measure that is probably good and necessary and saves everybody from really bad stuff in the EU, in this case, for iOS notarization, and muddies the waters by having it be like, well, yeah, but we have a policy against emulators, so we're going to reject you, or we're going to spend months holding up your apps, like what Riley Testoot says is happening with AltStore. Or in this case, we don't like your button in your app. And as what Tim Sweeney said is like, there's a big thing at the top that says Epic Store. There's no attempt in this app to, according to Epic, to pretend to be the App Store.
Especially
and I think
when Apple makes it so hard to install these things in the first place.
Exactly.
Nobody's surprised that they've installed it.
So suggesting that a design button, and I'll also say something so generic as an install button or a get button, as a security risk that must be used via notarization. What it is it's Apple using security as an excuse to exert control that they're used to exerting. And I have a hard time seeing a scenario here where Apple isn't in the wrong. Apple is playing a dangerous game with notarization, and I think they're gonna get slapped for it because they're turning their security excuse into just that, into a thing that they're using in order to do a de facto control of outside the App Store. And they promised not to do that. They haven't done it on the Mac, but in the EU, it seems like they have decided to change their story and say, no, we're going to use iOS notarization to reject anything that displeases us and act as a gatekeeper. And again, I think notarization is a good step to have in the process. I think having Apple as a platform owner look at stuff that's coming in and say, oh, this is malware, we're not going to sign it, we're going to reject it, is a good thing.
Yep.
But if you start turning it into an App Store rejection and approval process that has a lot to do with things that are not fundamental security, but it's like, well, we just don't like it that way, we want you to change it, then the whole thing has the potential to just get thrown out, which actually makes it worse for everybody. And I don't know, maybe that's their intent, is to say the EU forced us to make this terrible, but like, it's on them. They're the ones who are muddying what should be a very clear, pristine, straightforward notarization process, as it is and has been for years now on macOS.
I'm going to read the notarization for iOS apps guidelines for security. Apps cannot enable distribution of malware or suspicious or unwanted software. They cannot download executable code, read outside of the container, or direct users to lower the security on their system or device. Also, apps must provide transparency and allow user consent to enable any party to access the system or device or reconfigure the system or other software. Like, I don't know within that the issue around a get button. And like the other things, accuracy, functionality, safety, and privacy, like definitely doesn't apply to either of these as well. And this is from the review guidelines. So I think it's very clear at this point, as you said, that Apple are using notarization as essentially app review, which they said they wouldn't do, but they appear to be doing, because I can't see a scenario looking at the notarization guidelines how the look of a button could be argued.
Yeah.
Because this has got nothing to do, this should have nothing to do with Apple now. Because I would say that potentially even having notarization at all could upset the European Union based on the way that the DMA is written, right?
Yeah.
Like the fact that Apple is still a gatekeeper, still.
Gatekeeping. Arguably, they're using it to be a gatekeeper, and the more they make it arbitrary and not like Mac OS, the more they're a gatekeeper.
And there is a scenario, right, where this is fine, where like everyone can be like, yeah, you know what? If you're checking for malware and viruses, we're not going to argue with that. Like, that makes sense. But it should be an automatic process, but it isn't. And now there's just more. And like, the thing I don't understand, Jason, right? Like, I kind of get to a point, like we were talking about those a couple of weeks ago, like the emulator apps, and they reject them, right? That they maybe want to do that and think they can get away with it. But this is Epic. Why would you do this? Like, do you think that they weren't going to complain? Like, what was your end game here? It's very strange to me. I can't get my head around this one. Even the thing of like, oh, well, so Epic complains, so they said it's okay, but you still got to change. It's like, what is going on here? Like, what is the goal that they're trying to achieve from this?
It's a good question. I would also say for those who would argue, as John Gruber does, that like, well, wait a second, but it's Epic here. Do we really trust them? This is how eroded my trust is in Apple using mechanisms like Gatekeeper or as a gatekeeper, mechanisms like notarization to do things beyond their remit as a steward of their platform, and using it as a crude, blunt instrument to smash stuff they don't like, in violation, I think, of certainly the spirit of the DMA, and act as a gatekeeper and erect new gates in order to, because they were told they needed to, but use them as a gatekeeper again. Like, I think it's super telling that Epic, a company I do not like, run by a guy I think is a jerk, I think they've got more credibility in this than Apple does. I think people at Apple should consider that somebody like me who observes this stuff trusts Epic, who I don't like, and believes them more than I believe Apple's claims at this point. Mm-hmm. And that's where Apple is right now, is that I'm inclined to believe that this is Apple based on a whole track record. And like, again, if Apple wants to explain itself, by all means, explain yourself. But what they're doing is the same game plan as when they were arbitrarily rejecting things in the App Store, which is it's confusing. They obfuscate. They don't really explain themselves. And then occasionally they'll just be a press report and then there'll be an approval because they just don't. Maybe it gets escalated to somebody who says it's not worth it. Just let it through. And we'll bureaucrat them later with a fix-it ticket. Like, again, if they want to make their point, I'm happy to hear it, but I don't. It looks an awful lot like they are completely ruining the concept of notarization as a security measure because they can't let go of the control of their platform. And I understand why they want control of their platform, but you know what? The European Commission has said they can't. They can't. In Europe, they don't get to have that control of their platform at the level that they want. And they seem to not be able to let it go. And it's like, I get why they don't like it, but I also don't like the idea that notarization is being turned into de facto app approval.
Because what I don't like about it is it feels like they're being disingenuous. That's what I don't like about it. Like, they said it was going to be used for one thing, and they're using it for another, and it just feels disingenuous at this point. Especially when, well, if you Apple, if you don't feel that way, then let's talk about it, right? Talk about it. You're not.
Yeah.
I will also just state, like, I will provide the opposite. Like, I get why people don't like Epic, but Epic are a very big, legitimate, very powerful company who have performed some stunts against Apple. But these are stunts that I ultimately agreed with where they were coming from, right? Like, what people don't like Epic for, in a lot of instances, is what they, by sneaking in the in-app purchase stuff into Fortnite, which, I mean, I think we go back to the argument of where we are currently sitting is, did Apple really have the right to own all of the in-app purchase flow for something that they were ultimately uninvolved with the success of Fortnite? Fortnite wasn't successful because of Apple, right? But yet they wanted their 30%. Like, that's what a lot of people don't like Epic for. But if you like any of what's happening now, like anything that's happening now, Epic are the reason for it. But then I also think that's why some people don't like Epic even more, because they don't like what Apple's currently having to do. This all goes back to that free Fortnite. That's where all of this started. Is free Fortnite. So that was a great day though. That was so exciting. It was so much fun. God, that was a great day. But yeah, that's where we are. Who knows what will be next week? But I'm kind of just flabbergasted about the fact that they're playing this game with this particular company. Like it doesn't. I just wished I could understand the logic behind that, because surely I do not see it.
I also think, one of their motivations here, I mean, I think some of this at this point is they view them as an enemy. Yeah. And they're just Apple views Epic as an enemy, and they're going to treat them that way. But I think there's a larger issue here, which is Apple has often been motivated to take their cut, right? They believe that you didn't build Fortnite on our platform, but you want to be on our platform? Well, that's fine, but you got to cut us in. We want our cut. That's a classic Apple maneuver. It's been like that for years. Apple wants its money. And Apple believes that everybody that's on its products and platforms and is making money from things that are related to Apple is all built on the greatness of Apple, and that Apple deserves to be paid for it. That is a fundamental that Steve Jobs brought back to the company when he revived it in the late 90s, and they want their money. And I look at something like this and think, you're following this instinct so far that I don't know about European regulators and politics and things like that, but I look at this and think, for want of your cut, you're going to get an enormous fine, because this is the kind of behavior that will lead to an enormous fine from the EU, which is it's like you agreed to fix this, and now you've turned the fix into an app review.
Like the things that they tried to do in public to be legitimate, they were potentially running in the way of a fine, right? Let alone now what they're doing post it. Very strange. Very strange. Saddle up for Rumor Roundup.
Yeehaw.
Mark Gurman is reporting that Phil Schiller will get an observer board seat at OpenAI as part of their arrangement with Apple. That Apple will get a seat, and that it's going to be filled by Phil Schiller. This is the same arrangement that OpenAI have with Microsoft, where they have, I believe it's Satya Nadella, sits on the board as an observer. This was part of the fallout of the Sam Altman drama, leaving OpenAI, being kicked out and then coming back, and they changed the whole board.
Right.
An observer on OpenAI's board cannot vote or make any decisions about the company, but because they're on the board, they are aware of the company roadmap. They're present in board meetings, etc.
Well, I think it's great that they're giving Phil Schiller stuff to do. I think he's already doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I think that
somebody
whole
without
previous
a title
thing we spoke about, he might have been involved in that.
But Phil Schiller being given a seat on the board, or as you put it, the seat that will be filled by Phil Schiller. I just want to say the phrase Phil Schiller seat filler.
Oh,
anyway, because that's where we are. Phil Schiller seat filler. There he is. He's there. I have seen people, everybody needs to have a hot take on stuff, right? So I've seen people what does it mean? And what do they do? And why are they getting in bed with these awful people and all this stuff? And I'll just say, if my company had a partnership with OpenAI, and I had, as a part of that, the ability to have one of my people sit in on the board meetings, just as Microsoft does, so that this thing that might be connected to my company in some way and is kind of weirdly run, that I had some more understanding of what they were doing. And even though I'm not controlling it at all, it gives me a better sense of whether they are doing good stuff or whether they're going off the rails. I think it's obviously much more important for Microsoft, that is hugely invested in OpenAI, and it's much more mission critical for Microsoft than Apple. But this idea of having some actual real tech companies watching the clown show at OpenAI, and making sure that they don't continue, return to their clownish ways, that they're not doing stuff that's bizarre. I view it as that. This is not adult supervision. It's more like adults in the room to offer advice and also be able to go back to their companies and go, oh boy, this is what OpenAI is up to. So I think
there's this exciting thing they're working on, right? Well, how can we integrate that? I mean,
sure.
When I see this, I'm like, man, what are Microsoft thinking about all of this? Right? Where it's Apple's coming in and getting a lot of the same like treatment and then
For
providing
nothing.
way less. Like I can't.
Yeah.
I'm very intrigued to see what Microsoft's end game is here. Like because what it looks like is they're starting to build their own stuff that they will be able to replace, and it's like, well, then what happens to OpenAI? Because OpenAI benefits significantly from the infrastructure they get from Microsoft.
Right.
Really interesting.
I think based on Satya Nadella's history, I actually think he doesn't care, because this is not the Microsoft of old.
Yeah.
Microsoft doesn't have a mobile operating system, right? It doesn't. It's got Windows.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. They're integrating all this stuff into Copilot PCs and all that. They don't have a mobile operating system, and they're heavily invested in OpenAI, and the competition is Google. And along this one particular axis, it's Apple and Microsoft and OpenAI on one side and Google on the other.
Yeah.
And so there is a lot of alignment. I have heard they said if there's something top secret that is involving the Microsoft relationship with OpenAI, they can, they'll ask Phil Schiller to leave the room. He will leave his seat that he was feeling fulfilled, and Phil will move outside for Phil's coffee, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and technically any coffee that Phil Schiller has is Phil's coffee. Anyway, I'm just enjoying that way too much.
Phil coffee.
And likewise, if there's something that is super relevant to the Apple relationship and Microsoft needs to not hear about it, they might ask Satya Nadella to step outside as well. So I don't think it's that weird, and I also don't think it's that big a deal. I think that there's a level of sort of courtesy involved here, which is like, since we're going to be your partner. But it's my initial reaction was, they're not paying them. Nobody's paying anybody, and it's an optional feature. And so why is it a big deal? I think the reason it's a big deal is more what I said earlier, which is it's OpenAI's best mobile platform access, right? Because their enemy is Google, and Google controls the other platform. So they need to be in alignment with Apple, and they want Apple to get it, even if Apple is holding them at arm's length, which I believe they really are. I think Apple, right? They've got all the warning labels. It's turned off by default. It warns you when it goes to ChatGPT. Apple is doing it kind of as a hedge, but also at arm's length. But from OpenAI's perspective, like, it's a big deal because, they're not going to, I mean, Android is open and I'm sure it'll welcome them and all that. But, Google's AI is going to be in Android phones. That's how it is. It already is. It's going to continue to be that way. This is an opportunity they see to play in the most important tech space, which is smartphones. So I think that's what's behind it.
Mark Gurman is also reporting on some details about the upcoming Apple Watch releases for this year. The Series 10 will be getting bigger screens, with the larger option of the two being about the same size as the Ultra. So we've heard this before. This is Mark Gurman putting his kind of chip on this pile. The Apple Watch will be thinner, but not expecting any more visual design changes. So this previously rumored Apple Watch X that was going to be like all new and different, it's not going to be this one.
Not this.
The Series 10 and the Ultra, which would be otherwise unchanged, the Apple Watch Ultra, they're not doing anything to it other than giving it a new system on a chip, which will be in both the 10 and the Ultra. Gurman says this, quote, could lay the groundwork for AI enhancements down the road. I expect we'll see about that. I'm still not sure what that story is going to be. 8 gigabytes of RAM embedded in the watch strap.
I wrote that whole story. I think we talked about it. I wrote that whole story last week for Macworld about not emoji fragmentation, Siri fragmentation, and the idea like there are ways for them to approach this, and this may be that, right? This may be very much like, how do we get Apple Watch to a point where it can hand off Apple intelligence and seem like it's got Apple intelligence, but most of it is happening in the cloud, or it's happening on its paired iPhone, like something else. Like, I think, because remember, it's a 2-layer or multiple layer model that they're doing the way Apple Intelligence is working. You're giving a command, and then it's actually, the model is determining whether it's going to execute that on device or whether that's the kind of thing that it needs to go to the cloud to do. And so what you'd want is a device capable of sort of like doing the top layer, even if it can't really do the rest of it and has to hand it off. That's one way you could approach it. So beefing up the hardware, but like, yeah, I think down the road is the key phrase there, because it may be like they know they need to build the hardware in now, but they know software-wise they're just not going to get there for another year.
So yesterday, sitting on the couch, and I saw Adina's watch had the your battery's about to die thing. And I was like, "Do you want me to take that upstairs and put it on a charge for you?" I was sitting upstairs. She's like, "Yeah, sure." She has the small watch, and I was holding it in my hands. I was like, "This watch is so small, so small."
Well, you have an Ultra, right?
I have an Ultra. Yeah, but it was just like in holding it, I was like, "Wow, this thing is tiny." And I mean, I spoke to her. I said, the rumors of the watches are going to get bigger, and she's like, "Oh, I don't know," because the current Apple Watch, it's still when she wears a sport band, there's you can see through the sport band, right? It doesn't attach to her wrists because she's a very petite person. And I'm just not I'm very I remain open-minded but intrigued about if these watches get the screens get physically bigger. That is an interesting decision to make that people, I think, this is my thing. I think people won't like it, or people will say they won't like it, but ultimately most people will get used to it. But we'll see.
This actually, I know it's one of your favorite topics.
Yeah.
If there's this impulse toward doing more screen, we need more screen on the Apple Watch, which I understand. I mean, it's also more battery, presumably, more screen. I kind of get it, just because if you can fit more on there and it's a little easier to interact. But I wonder, it is a dangerous game they're playing. They make the Apple Watches larger. Are they aware of what portion of their user base might really be resistant to having a larger Apple Watch? This is the same argument with phones. It's I know people like small phones. I had an iPhone mini, but Apple's decisions suggest that there aren't enough of them for them to worry about it. And, if you lose some people at the bottom end, but it makes your product more popular elsewhere, then that's a decision you can make, and people can be upset about it, but it could be understandable. But there's a risk there. So what I just had the thought, what would mitigate this a little bit would be if Apple actually was working on a fitness band-ish kind of Apple Watch design that was really small, and that relied, because not all Apple Watch interaction needs a screen, right? A lot of it can be voice assistant, and it's about syncing to the Apple Watch or syncing to the iPhone. And not everybody is super screen forward. Maybe there's a little tiny screen on it that tells you the time or shows you your rings, but is not a full-blown Apple Watch. And that would be one way you could push the Apple Watch up and still have people maybe like Adina and other people who don't need a full-blown Apple Watch with a big screen to be happy. And I'm a little surprised that they haven't gone down that path of having, a lighter version of the Apple Watch, of WatchOS, that's a different product that's more like a fitness band. I'm a little surprised they haven't gone there.
Yeah, and while I want that product, personally, I still don't. I see where you're coming from with it. I just think that there are a lot of people that would be upset about the watch size changes. It's not that they necessarily don't want a watch, right? I feel like it would be, honestly, a harder sell for my wife to get her to change to that product than to just accept a bigger screen.
A bigger screen. Well, yeah, I mean, this is the difficulty of marketing, and I'm sure that they've done a lot of research of their existing customers and potential customers and what their competition is doing when they make these changes, just as they do with the iPhone. But yeah, this one seems really weird on the outside. The fitness band, I'm just thinking there's probably another segment there that doesn't need. I'm fascinated by the impulse of let's make the screen bigger, because I don't feel like I need my Apple Watch screen to be bigger at this point. I don't need it to be bigger. I just don't. I think that it's good enough, and I find that a strange impulse. It's a little like saying we need our pro laptops to be very thin. It's I get it on a really broad scale, but in the end, the product needs, is that your top profile? Is that your top reason here? You're like, oh yeah, thinness is the most. It's it's not for a pro laptop. And for the Apple Watch, I'm yeah, bigger screens can be nice, but I don't know at what cost. But they are the ones who know who buys these things, and they are the ones who know, or at least they think they know, based on their research. And that's a tough job. So maybe they're right. Maybe they can keep pushing it. This is the first one of these where I've gotten these reports and thought, I don't know, you're basically ultrafying more of the Apple Watch line. The Ultra becomes just a rugged Apple Watch. It's no longer the big Apple Watch. It's
It
just
will have
the
the battery
rugged
life
Apple
though,
Watch.
compared.
Sure.
Because the Apple Watch Ultra is really thick, right? And the
Right.
rumor is that this one is going to get thinner. So
Yeah.
but yeah,
I don't know. I just
yeah.
And I also agree. This was something that came up on Accidental Tech podcast last week, which is, our friend Casey Liss. People love it when we talk about Casey on Upgrade.
Because he's the best.
Buys a small Apple Watch because he says he has small wrists. And Marco made the point the other day because he saw him at WWDC. He said, "You do not need to wear a small watch. You can wear the big watch and it's fine." And I wonder if part of it is Apple sort of saying, lots of people think that they want a smaller watch, but they don't. And when we check and we test and we ask people and we try it, they don't. And that we think we know what they want. And maybe that's true, but your example of Adina, maybe she's a real extreme outlier.
She is. She's a very, very petite person. But
Yeah.
I still think that she would actually be able to make it work. It just wouldn't be as nice. But one of the things for her, though, that I could imagine is if they made it thinner, like significantly thinner, it would be comfortable in a different way. Because like the Apple Watch sits very proudly on her wrist. Like it's very chunky. And so, you're kind of maybe at that point trading off one for the other, right? That it is thinner, and so it doesn't stick out as much, but it's a bit bigger. And
so you're spreading it out instead of just expanding it. You're kind of squishing it and letting it spread out a little bit. Yeah.
And so we'll see. I mean, I do have faith in them when it comes to this. Like on the face of it, this is one of those things where I'm like, whoa, I can tell that's going to make people upset. But I am definitely of the mind that a lot of people could wear a bigger watch and they'll be fine with it. But I think people have a hesitancy to it. But I just look at the phone thing, right? That there is, what is that, the term stated and revealed preference, which by and large, I don't necessarily agree with that thinking, especially when it comes to software and algorithms and stuff. But I think that with phones, that seems to have borne out, that when people get the choice of buying a phone, they tend to buy the bigger one, or they try a bigger one and they realize that they love it and could never go back. I would be intrigued to see if that applies to smartwatches. I don't know. But like for me, I love the Ultra and I like the bigger screen. It's fine. I like being able to see more on it. But now I am tied to the battery more than anything else. That's what I am tied to. So
I see.
But I don't think these are going to get that battery life improvement because they're going to make it thinner, which I do actually think is the right move, though, if you're going to make it bigger.
Maybe that's the answer. It's all very subtle, but I'm looking down at my watch now and I'm remembering the original Apple Watch and like
so small.
It's so much better, and I would argue, yes, that's the dimension that I would like to see change. I'm less concerned about the screen size than I am about the thickness, and maybe one of the ways that you make it thinner is by expanding the footprint so that the battery can, continue to take up a reasonable amount of volume while not, in the width while losing some of the height. I don't know.
And frankly, like it just comes back to the thing. If Apple's making this decision, they're making it for reasons that make sense for them. They can't try to appease everybody. Like we've seen them try to do that. Like they have that fourth phone, and that fourth phone never does well, right? And that fourth phone is the don't worry, we'll make you happy phone, and it doesn't sell, and they keep changing it. So
well, yeah, because they've realized. I mean, they're trying to find a market at the edges.
Yeah,
and it turns out that maybe none of the edges are a big enough market for them, right? Like maybe they've been searching around in the dark, like, well, what about this kind of phone? Well, what about this? And it may be like, no, the iPhone, yes, having some other models to choose from is good, but like when you start to push outside of the big middle, none of them are worth it for Apple to spend the time on it because there are always going to be companies making weird kind of niche shapes and sizes and stuff, but like for Apple to do it, it really needs to sell incredibly well, and they've found in some cases that it's that those are not places they want to go.
I mean, I would say though that they should make a small phone before they should continue making the Mac Pro. That's my take on that one. If you want to find some edges, I think there's more edges for an iPhone Mini than there are for a Mac Pro.
Yeah, there's just more, but there's also more profit margin. There's much more profit.
Yeah, but like 90% of 4 sales, you know what I mean? Rather than 30% of a couple of million. you know?
Yep.
Going back to this report from Mark Gurman, do not expect any significant health sensor changes this year. Apple continues work on their sleep apnea detection and blood pressure monitoring as their next big things to go for before hopefully getting to blood glucose down the line. But they have hit development issues on these features, as well as having the whole problem around the blood oxygen sensor in the US, which would be used for both or at least sleep apnea detection. They can't. It would be difficult for them to be like, "Hey, we have this new feature," but not in America. So who knows what they're going to do there?
Yeah, it's not great. His statement about where they are with blood pressure too is that they're not going to be able to take your blood pressure. It'll be like your blood pressure was higher or lower, but like
it's like the wrist temperature.
It's not going to be. Yeah, This is a continued issue with the Apple Watch. Is they've got a lot of sensor data that's feeding features that it's like it's something, but it's not exactly what you want.
The problem with their health sensors is they started off with an excellent one, right? The heart rate monitoring, which they can do incredibly well. And then everything else since is like, well, we can only give you the light version of this. And I think that disparity has gotten like worse and worse over time. But, blood pressure going up or down is interesting information to have, maybe more than the blood oxygen. The wrist temperature stuff I know is useful for people, so that's good. But it's like they're more hit and miss than like how it started with like bang, here's blood, here's your heart rate. We can give you that like incredibly precise, and also we can save your life, right? Like that was as big as a hit you could make, and then everything since is a bit like, you could kind of use it to check against the baseline, which is less exciting. Although I am very intrigued about their vitals thing that they're bringing, where it's like pulling in a bunch of information, where maybe it's going to be greater than the sum of its parts of what they can provide for that.
Maybe.
So,
I mean, the sensors may get better.
Yeah.
The analysis of sensor data, I think there's a lot of potential in there. That's the thing where you use machine learning algorithms to do analysis of data, and you can pull some signal out of the noise, which can be useful. So, over time this may evolve, but there is also just the challenge of a thing that's the size of like a big postage stamp sitting on your wrist. And from there, all information about your body needs to be divined. That's hard to do. It's just hard to do.
Apple has also apparently discussed a new Apple Watch SE featuring a hard plastic case instead of aluminium in efforts to reduce the price. I think this is a very good idea.
Makes sense to me.
This makes
I had a plastic watch
sense.
for years and years and years.
Perfect sense. Remember, this is what we wanted the Ultra to be. We wanted like a G-Shock, right? Like that's what I was hoping for, and they didn't give it to me. But I think this is a great idea for, I would expect, who are the majority of people that get an SE. That like it's for young people and it's for older people, and it's like, you know what, this thing is a watch for a purpose. It is not a watch for fashion. So
indeed,
we'll see if they do that. I hope they do, but I don't know. I think Apple was so burned on the 5C that going back to plastic is a problem for them, which makes me sad.
Also,
because I think you do some.
Also,
fun
plastic
stuff with
is
that.
bad for the environment, and they have all sorts of environmental commitments. So there's a question.
Depends how you do it. Right.
Yeah, if it's recycled plastic.
Yes, because
it's
then
hard
they can make
to
a
do
good
it to their standards.
Yeah. Yes, of course, but they can make a good. And also, this is one of those things of like, what is quote unquote plastic from this reporting?
Right. What material?
What
are
is
they
the
actually
material?
using?
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
There could be something else
Depends.
going on there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's made of paper. Just really good pressed paper. Don't get it wet.
Yeah, it's
Don't get it wet.
That's right. Yeah, it's from corn. And it's pressed and it's biodegradable.
Don't get it too hot.
So you can get it wet. You can get it wet, but don't leave it soaking in water or it will dissolve.
Yeah. You stand too close to the grill and your Apple Watch just pops,
Yep. Sure.
Oh boy. Mac rumors have found reference to a new home accessory in development from Apple. They found it in some code being referred to as, quote, home accessory 17,1. This makes Mac Rumors believe, based on the way that Apple kinds to delineate their naming schemes, that this would be a device running an A18 chip featuring a variant of tvOS. This continues the hope that a HomePod with a screen is a product in the future.
Yeah, so A18 is what, this fall's iPhone chip?
Yeah.
Which is interesting because
So it would
that
run
means
AI.
it's potentially Apple Intelligence,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
A variant of tvOS, which makes sense. This is the HomePod with a screen, right? It's some people did a mock-up that makes it look like the G4 iMac, which is really great. I know Mark Gurman has reported about this a little bit. The idea that it might be like a speaker with a little kind of arm and a screen above it that kind of can turn around and stuff. Mark Gurman keeps calling it a robot. He needs to stop. Do I have to get John Syracuse to weigh in? A home accessory with a screen and a speaker that might turn or tilt to keep your face in view is not a robot. It's just a thing with an adjustable screen. So
only you and John can make the ruling on this when this product becomes a reality.
I wish he would stop because he's got this narrative about Apple's also working on robotics, and he keeps throwing this thing in, and it's like, man, this is just a HomePod with a screen. This is not a robot. Stop making it part of Apple's robotics push. Come on. But I'm excited as somebody who had an Echo Show and now has a Google Home Nest, whatever, in my kitchen. I would love having a HomePod with a screen in my kitchen instead. That would be better. I would be much happier to have that. So I hope that's what this is.
Me too. Also, finally, Mark Gurman is reporting in his Power On newsletter that Apple Intelligence features will launch to the public in the spring of next year of iOS 18.4, with beta testing beginning in January. So this would be the more like actual like heavy stuff, right? The beginnings of understanding a lot more about your device and because there would still be things this year like ChatGPT and the new Siri design for 2024, but things that would be considered Apple Intelligence would be coming all the way into spring of next year, which is wild. Not
I don't think this is that new. I think the assumption
I
all along was that a lot of this stuff, I mean, there will be, make no mistake, there will be Apple Intelligence features that will ship in the fall. There will be some, but they're not going to be the ones you think.
More what Mark has got here, which is different to what he's reported before, is like, you know, it was always like, oh, they'll be next year, but now it's the kind of the nailing down of 18.4 as the thing for when we can expect these, and also the idea that beta testing wouldn't begin until January, where there's been a consideration that maybe it would be before 18 launched or at some point this year, but that doesn't seem possible now.
I appreciate the detail here, but it's not anything. It's exactly what I was expecting, which is I remember after WWDC just saying, look, they're going to be shipping this stuff all the way until next WWDC
and maybe after
and beyond.
Yeah.
Right? They're just going to keep on rolling it out because they're not. A lot of this stuff is just not ready, and they're moving fast, and they're trying to catch up. And they're going to be shipping this, and it's going to be an ongoing thing of the evolution of Apple Intelligence. But they made the announcement because they want to say, yes, we're on it, but it's going to take time. And it's going to be a real challenge. I mean, I know I've talked about it before. I know you talked about it with Federico. Like, iOS release day in the fall is not going to be like it was, even as Apple's been pulling features forward, and having it be more like there's a release and then more features come later in the fall and then more features come in the winter and the spring. This is going to be a lot of that. This is going to be like huge headline features that are just not going to be there for a while. And, that's like, I think it's a good thing to have a whole cycle, year-long cycle, instead of putting everything in the one edition. But here it's going to be really... it's going to be a challenge, right? Because they're not shipping their whole OS in the fall. They're shipping a first version and then adding on with the second version and the third version and the fourth version. So, yeah.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Uni Pizza Ovens. Uni is the world's #1 pizza oven company, letting you make restaurant-quality pizza in your own home. Uni pizza ovens can reach up to 950 degrees Fahrenheit, cooking pizza in as little as 60 seconds. The high temperature is what separates these pizzas that you'll make in an uni from those that you could make in a conventional oven. They're incredibly quick to heat up, and you'll be ready to go in only 20 minutes, which is just enough time to get all your toppings ready. Whether you love authentic wood-fired flavors, the convenience of cooking with gas, or whether you want to cook with wood, charcoal, gas, or even electricity, there is an uni oven that fits your needs and lifestyle. They have the wood pellet fueled Fire 12, the multi-fuel Karu 12G. These are smaller ovens. They have for better portability for people who want cooking on the go, camping, getting out into the wilderness and the like. But if you want the convenience of gas but love the flavor of wood-fired cooking, Uni's Karu line has got you covered because you can choose wood or charcoal right out of the box or get the optional gas burner for cooking flexibility. And now with Uni's electric Volt 12 pizza oven, you can make pizza both indoors and outdoors. Uni ovens are for more than just pizza. You can cook juicy burgers, sizzling fajitas, buffalo wings, and so much more. Their ovens start at just $299 with free shipping to the US, UK, and EU. And they also make cast iron cookware, pizza peels, thermometers, and loads of other accessories to help you level up your cooking. I love my Uni pizza oven. I have had the Volt for, I don't know, like 6 months or something like that, the electric one. And it's just a joy. It is a treat every time we get to use it. When we know we're going to make pizza, I look forward to that day, and the whole day is just good fun, right? Like, it's just good times. Yeah. It's good fun with the family. I love it. Listeners of this show can get 10% off their first purchase of an Uni pizza oven. Just go to uni.com, that is OONI.com, and use the code UPGRADE2024 at checkout. Uni pizza ovens are the best way to bring restaurant quality pizza to your home. So go to uni.com, that is OONI.com. Use the code UPGRADE2024 and you'll get 10% off. One of my other favorite things of Uni is you can also buy groceries from them too. So if you want the best cheeses, the best sauces, you can get it from them. Our thanks to Uni Pizza Ovens for their support of this show and Relay FM. So Summer of Fun is what we're in right now.
Summer of Fun!
Summer of Fun! And this is where, during this time of the year, we're trying to find stuff to have fun with, right?
Yep.
I would say this summer so far, tough summer. Like,
cruel. Would you say it's a cruel
summer? I would say it's a cruel summer.
All right.
I think right now it's hard. Like, being excited about technology is a little bit tougher right now because there's so many things to drag. Well, at least I find this that can drag me down. Like, while I enjoy talking about Epic and Apple, I would prefer that not to happen, right? Like, yeah. I find it interesting because it's happened, but my choice would be that didn't happen, right? And I like covering these things on the show because if it's important, I want to cover it, right? Like, if it's important to the landscape of Apple and how it shifts, I want to cover it. This is the same with Apple Intelligence, right? Where we were spending so much time talking about things like image playgrounds. I wish they wouldn't have done that. But if they're going to do it, I want to talk about it because I want to understand it with you and I want to talk about the ramifications of it. But I just think right now, all of these things that are happening makes covering technology just more tiring, whether it's us having to understand things to talk about them, whether we like them or not, to then also having spoken about them opens the door to all kinds of feedback from listeners, which understandably a lot of the time is not really directed at us, but they're sharing frustrations that they have with certain things. Yeah. And so as I was putting the document together today, and I was actually feeling a little bit of this, I was feeling a bit like, oof, I don't know how I feel about what's going on right now. I kind of wanted to understand from you if you have any thoughts about how you stay excited and enthusiastic about technology at times where news is low or where it drags you down. I kind of want to talk about that today a little bit.
Okay. I don't know. Do I have a pep talk? I don't know. But
you don't have to have a pep talk. But like, or at least what do you think about this idea? Do you feel like you're being dragged a little bit? Because I do.
Yeah, I mean, none of us, I think, and neither of us for sure, got into this because what we really wanted to do was talk about AI being potentially putting people out of work, potentially being trained on people's work without their permission, which is how it's basically gone. To talk about government regulation. Like, if I could encapsulate it, I would say, as a kid, I loved computers. And when we got the newspaper, the last section I would ever choose to read was the business section. I think that's sort of what I'm getting at, is I have an enthusiasm for technology. I don't have the enthusiasm, I'll put it this way, the enthusiasm does not stem from a lot of the places where we end up having to talk about it, right? That's not where my initial enthusiasm came from, right? As a kid, I wasn't like, oh boy, I can't wait to grow up and think about government regulation of technology companies and legislation and lawsuits and tech companies that might be out of control and ripping people off and potentially leading to the loss of lots of jobs and a very strange, impact on the world economy. Like, these are not why I'm interested in this stuff. So I guess but it's part of my job, right? And the job is not doing just fun stuff. I mean, like, I make those charts and we talk about it and it's fun and all that. But like, every time we do Apple quarterly earnings, August 1st, by the way, is the date this year or this quarter. So get ready. It'll be, just in time for me to be back from my trip to cover that. But like, every time I do that, and it's money and charts and stuff like that, I think it's that business section of the newspaper that I didn't even read, and here I am in it. And it's like, it's been part of my profession. Like, part of my profession is to understand Apple's business and why they do what they do. But like, are financial results something that I have fundamental kind of enthusiasm for? They aren't. Like, the stuff that keeps the pilot light lit, that keeps the flame burning, is that there are so many different ways that technology impacts my life and other people's life in a fun way. And that could be as simple as, I have a new nephew and the family chat iMessage thread is just full of pictures of this little baby and of my niece, his big sister, who's learning to adapt to having a younger sibling, which is exactly the dynamic that my kids had. That is, and then I can just drag and drop out of that to my mom, who wants to see pictures of the baby, other side of the family, so not related. So but she wants to see, because who doesn't want to see pictures of the baby? So I think about stuff like that. I think about having fun on the 4th of July, doing something as dumb as updating my JavaScript widget so that when my phone is in the kitchen in standby, it has the right temperature on it, and getting excited about talking to you about that weather station. And like, there's lots of cool stuff in terms of customizing what you do, and amazing that we have supercomputers in our pockets and all of that it still feels like the future. It still feels like that we live in an amazing time with all this amazing capability. I can't pretend and ignore all of the downsides, and I think they're important. I mean, I read a lot of science fiction, and let me tell you, science fiction is not generally PR for the tech industry, right? Like, science fiction has been and continues to be often extremely critical, extremely wary, extremely interested in talking about the cultural ramifications of technology in a way that I think tech companies and the social and political ramifications of technology in ways that tech companies are super not interested in thinking about, right? Because it gets in the, like, no, I just build it. I don't want to think about what it leads to because I have stock options, right? That's a lot of what's going on there. So I don't know. It's a mix. I just, when it's stuff that is getting me down, I try to also think about the stuff that is positive, because I can usually find positive amidst the negative. I don't know. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a million miles away from where I am too. I think I care a little bit more about the business side of technology than you do, but it isn't where my love comes from, right?
Yes.
It's similar, right? Where it's like, the thing that excites me is I like, technology is a toy for me, like it kind of always has been. And even though I use the same technology to do lots of things, I also like to play with the technology. And I would say maybe over the last 5 years or so, I've been finding new ways of doing that too, right? Where if it comes from like learning and building keyboards and learning like some of the electronics that go into that. And recently I've been getting a bit more interested in like the retro gaming handhelds and stuff, and all of the ridiculous work required to try and get emulators running on them and things like that, like and understanding what that might lead to. It's like, I've been trying to find these little hobby projects for me, which are just pure because I love the technology, but
Exactly.
it all is similar to like, I want to try this new app, or I want to be on this beta to see what this is about, and da da da. But the problem, I think, is that as we're getting further and further along, we are brushing up more and more with the science fiction of it all, and it just means that the toys become there are more health warning with the toys, right? And then we have to consider that stuff more, and because of where we are in this whole thing, we find ourselves talking about it more, and then like with everything is just more political than it used to be, so everyone, you got to pick your side, and it just becomes like a whole thing. And it, it can be tiring sometimes, I think, to focus on this stuff in the way that we do. I just think right now it's just particularly difficult. I'm finding it particularly difficult right now, right? Where like I'm wading into these huge topics, like about like what AI is, whether I like it or not, and I find it interesting to talk about. But it's also just very emotionally draining in a way that technology usually is exciting for me, right? Rather than, and like my emotions are being buoyed by technology rather than being drained by technology. Do you kind of follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's hard when you've got a hot button issue that is an issue that you need to talk about, because a really hot button issue, something like AI. The problem is that talking about it, like, it engenders so much feeling from people on all sides of the issue. And there's more than two sides with AI. And it can get really difficult really fast. And having difficult conversations is not bad. In fact, for podcasting, I think it can be very good. But having difficult conversations, good, healthy. Do they lead to good vibes? Maybe not. Sometimes you want good vibes, and that's just life, right? Sometimes, and if talking about technology is a place that maybe gives you good vibes, having the other difficult kinds of talks about technology are, not giving you those good vibes necessarily. And like, it's a natural reaction. You and I have had, if you go back a few years, we have had topics where we've talked on Sunday and said, basically, I guess we got to talk about it. And we do. And often those are good conversations, and they're good episodes. And the people in the Discord are like, I really appreciate that. And we get feedback later saying that was a really good conversation. And it's true. And I can even be proud of how that conversation went. But at the same time, on Sunday, we were like, we don't want to do this, but we have to. It's our responsibility. Yeah. And then as we're doing it, I feel unpleasant, right? I feel like, I don't love talking about this, but we need to do the work and we need to talk about it. And afterward, I feel more relieved that it's over than proud of what we've done. Sometimes both, but really it's just like, I'm glad we got through that and survived it. And I think that's some of this, right? Which is, you could do that, but like, I don't want, Mike, if everything we talked about had that weight on it, I wouldn't want to do podcasts anymore, right? I just wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah, if every episode was this. Yeah.
Let me tell you, there was a podcast called Download that Stephen Hackett and I did.
Yeah.
And it was our attempt to do a more general tech podcast. And what ended up happening was that it became because of when we were doing it, it became the weekly, all of the terrible ways that Facebook is ruining humanity podcast, essentially. Yep. And we couldn't dodge it. It was the tech story of that period. And you know what happened to download is we stopped doing it because it was so unpleasant to talk about those topics and they didn't bring us joy. And we created a topic that people did love called the Fuzzy Puppy Update that we did at the end of that podcast, literally because we felt like the show was so dark that we needed to cheer people up and cheer ourselves up when we were done. I'm like, man, I just can't. There's serious stuff that we have to talk about, but like if everything was like that, this is not what I got into this to do. It would just be I would try to find something else to do with my life.
Yeah, I think maybe my particular issue is I have 3 shows that are talking about these topics right now.
You do.
And that might be too many for one person.
Yeah.
Like usually it's great. Like having 3 places where I can talk about tangentially related stuff or similar stuff, but with different people in different ways. I love it. And I think even now, like what we're doing right now, I'm still having these conversations in very different ways on the different shows, but it might be a lot for just one man. You know, I am but one man, Jason Snell.
I agree.
And so, yeah, I don't know. This is the cruel summer that we're in, I suppose, and it's just a case of like pushing through it. But then when I hear things like spring of 2025, I'm like, Jesus, please just launch it, so I don't have to keep speculating about the launching of the. You know what I mean? Just get it out there, then we can understand it, deal with it, and move on. Like it's like the not knowing is the part that's frustrating for me right now. Maybe
I want to recommend to people who haven't heard it last week's episode of Connected, episode 509. It's just you and Federico. Federico has lots of thoughts about AI, but what I liked about it, and I don't agree. I mean, this is the challenge, right? It's also not fun. Let's just say it. It's also not fun when one of your friends is extremely passionate about an issue and you don't entirely agree with them, right? I don't entirely disagree with him either, but my take on it is not quite his. And that can be awkward, right? That can be awkward and difficult. I thought you did a good job in that episode of saying, letting him say what he wanted to say and saying, I see where you're coming from. I don't entirely agree or disagree with it. But what I liked about that episode is he got to elaborate very clearly some of his concerns about AI. And it's not, if you sort of pegged Federico as the guy who's angry that models were trained on his content, that's not what most of that episode is about. It's actually or at least the core of it. It's actually more about a concern about how AI is used and is going to be used, and how it is, in Federico's opinion, I think fundamentally it has the potential to be frequently misused in a way that is fundamentally dehumanizing. And it's a big issue and it's complicated. And what I found valuable in that is that I really liked hearing somebody who could walk me through his entire perspective on it, even if there were points that I didn't agree with, because it was really good to think about it. Was it summer fun, good vibes? No, sir, it was not. But I really liked it and I appreciated all of it this is a callback to our follow-up, while I was power washing my outdoor table. I was thinking deep thoughts about AI with Federico Vitici while also power washing my patio. So
yeah, I mean, I
people should
feel
listen.
like, ostensibly, what I am doing as a career, which I am thrilled that I get to do, is to entertain people, right? Like that is ostensibly what I do. It can be. I think it is harder to entertain people with topics like this. Now, I think that episode of Connected was very entertaining in an interesting way, but I find it harder to produce something that I think is entertaining, like emotionally harder, when it's about such a difficult topic. I find it way easier to crack jokes, right?
Of course.
With my friends.
Sure.
And have a good time.
And like I was saying about our difficult topics, it can't always be that, right? We do have to buckle down and do those difficult topics and say, we have to talk about this. And I wouldn't, I'm not interested in doing a podcast that's entirely unmoored from anything and is just in jokes and wackiness and all of that. Like everything, and there's a spectrum. There's a scale there. There's a spectrum that podcasts can run on. I also wouldn't want it. I wouldn't want it to be dead serious all the time, but I also wouldn't want it to be entirely weightless all the time, right? Like the world is mixed, and we need to be mixed. But you're right. The difficult stuff, even if it's necessary and good to talk about it, is still difficult, and it doesn't spark the kind of joy that the fun stuff does.
Yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to talk about this a little bit today. This wouldn't really go anywhere other than the fact of just like lifting the lid of my brain a little bit and letting people look inside. Like, this is kind of where I am right now, and it's interesting. I am very aware of the fact that I am running on fumes at the moment because we're entertaining over 1,000 people in like 2 weeks. So like I may be running a little raw at the moment, which might be why I'm feeling this way today. So thank you for indulging me.
Sure, of course.
Should we do some Ask Upgrade?
Let's do it.
Let's finish out with some Ask Upgrade today. Kit writes in and says, I have the newest iPad mini and its battery life is at a point where I'm considering ordering a new one. I don't recall ever replacing an Apple product within the same generation, though. Have either of you replaced an unbroken device with a product of the same generation? I just wanted to start off by saying that I feel for Kit, and I think that Apple's doing the iPad mini an injustice. That product should be given more love. It's a fantastic form factor.
Yes. Also, Kit, maybe battery replacement. Keep it alive. For another year.
Yeah, that's the
battery
way to
replacement.
do it.
Then you can hand it down, and then you can buy yourself a new iPad mini. But like at this point in its life cycle, a battery replacement is going to be cheaper, I think, than an iPad mini. So maybe you wait, and it will remain usable.
But for me, the only product I could think of is something like AirPods. But I've replaced AirPods within the same generation, and that is either because the batteries are so gone, but like with that product, the battery replacement like cost isn't really worth it compared to replacing them. And I think Apple actually just replaces them if you need to replace the batteries anyway. You just get new ones. So I've done it with both sets of AirPods Pro because also that's a product that lasts a really long time. And usually they've done it both times. If you do get the quote unquote the same product, it might be slightly different. Like Qi charging case or USB-C check case and Vision Pro features or whatever, but where technically it's still the same thing. But I couldn't think of anything else, and I do think that is partly because we try and if we're replacing something, it's usually because there's something new, right? And we're replacing for the new thing way more frequently than the average consumer would.
Yeah, I think we're unusual in that way. Yeah. I also do a lot of hand-me-downs. So, again, usually it's a new tech, and then I'll move them down the chain. It has happened, and again, they're not quite the same. But like, I did get the AirPods with the Qi charging case, and use that as an opportunity to push my AirPods down to Jamie, I think. So yeah, there's some of that, but not really, because we're primarily, because this is what we do, getting the next thing.
And Yoav asks, how do you explain to non-tech people, especially family, that your iPhone does not listen to you to show ads? I can never get them to believe me. I think cross-site tracking is so hard to understand, and the conspiracy theory is more attractive. I wonder if there had been a conversation around the family dinner table for you over the last couple of weeks. Like it's interesting. This is funny to me, right? Like getting this question was actually a good example of this phenomenon. 2 days ago, me and Adina were having a conversation about this idea, and then Yoav wrote to me. So it's almost like Yoav was listening to me too, right?
Oh no,
but
Yoav, how could you?
I just think these algorithms are so good. I think it's two things are going on here, personally. I think the algorithms are so good that they can often show you things you're interested in based on whatever it took for you to become interested in that thing, because they just know. Plus, human nature means we draw connections to things where there otherwise might not be one, right? So I think it's the two things going together where, like, one, the system knows what you want and is giving it to you. And two, if you recall something, then you can jump to like, oh, I was just thinking about that, or I was just talking about that. But you don't, for the things that you weren't thinking about, go, I was never thinking about that. You know, like you only can pay attention to the patterns. What do you think about this kind of stuff?
I was happy to see your response because it's mine too, which is I don't think you can convince them of anything.
Yeah.
Because it is just so much. I just don't think there is, because it's so easy for people to make connections like that. What I will say is, if you want to talk about it technically, you're like, oh yeah, but if you say the name, right, then the voice assistant, and that means it's always listening. It's like Apple's got like markers about whether it's listening to audio or not. And the way those wake words work is that the microphone on the device, there's an algorithm that's listening for the wake word. That's why it gets mistriggered. But like, it's not listening for conversation anyway. The only thing it's listening for is the wake word. And Apple actually got in a lot of trouble where it turned out that some of their activations, the audio was being recorded and was available in data centers, and now you have the option to say no to that. So like, I feel like again, it's impossible because it's a conspiracy theory, and you can't. You can give facts. If they want to believe it, they're going to believe it. But the fact is,
it's also like it's a harmless conspiracy theory by and large, right? For most people, that it's just kind of one to
of
just
all
let
the
go.
things.
Yeah,
It's just the ads. Like, of all the things that you could do with that information, this is actually a pretty harmless one. There are way worse things you could do. So, but that's what I would say is, if they want to believe it, they can believe it. But I would tell you, as somebody who's watched stories about Apple over the years, that if this was happening, we would all know about it, right? But we don't. And in fact, Apple is like a war with Facebook over ad targeting. So it's, you know, but I think in the end you can bring out all the facts, but if they want to believe that their phone is listening to them, I guess you just got to let them, but it's not.
I've never listened to the podcast Reply All, but I remember they did an episode on this subject that I saw lots of people very excited about. So I'll put a link in the show notes to that. Maybe this will help them. It's called "Is Facebook Spying on You?" was the episode.
Yeah.
And they tried to investigate this exact phenomenon. I'm sure that they probably end up in a scenario which is interesting, but still won't help you convince people in your lives that this isn't happening. I mean, the other thing, you know, I said, like, if your concern is that your iPhone is listening to you, even if it is, that data is never finding its way to Facebook, right? Like, that's the problem here, right? Like, for us, is what we know, we're too close to the metal. They're never giving that information to Instagram, right? Like, that's not why you're getting Instagram
For
ads,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
It's not like Apple was listening to you.
Yeah, exactly. They're not. They would use that for their own purposes and not for Facebook's purposes. So maybe you could shift the conspiracy a little bit. That, like, it's only Apple could even be listening, and they wouldn't share that with Facebook. So whatever you see on Facebook or on the web, like, Apple doesn't want anybody else to have that information.
You can see why it's so enticing to people, right? Because you don't also then have to do a lot of Googling to see that Apple and Google have this huge deal together about like search engines, right? Which is so easy to then just be like, well, maybe they're just giving this data to Google, right? Like, you know, you can. This is the problem with this stuff, is there is I think sometimes in a lot of ways wise mistrust about these large companies, but it then ends up sometimes going a little bit too far, where this one, it just doesn't make sense for these businesses to do this because of the amount of information they would have to be sharing. And also there's a thing of like, nobody cares about you that much. Right? That someone's listening to your phone. I'm sorry.
Well,
that's not
and
happening.
also the algorithms are still not that great. Like, it's literally, if you search for a folding chair on Amazon, all your ads then suddenly are like, hey, folding chair enthusiast, would you like to buy many more folding chairs? It's like, no, I bought one.
I see happen a lot, and I think this is one that trips people up, right? A lot, say like Instagram or whatever, they are aware, depending on how you have stuff set up, of devices on your network and what they're searching for, right? Like based on IP addresses. So you could have had a conversation with your partner, and your partner went and looked something up, then you get ads for the thing you were talking about, right? Like, this is one where I think that's one of the things that's happening that trips people up, where they're like, whoa, I was just talking about this and I haven't looked for it yet and I have an ad for it. It's like, yeah, because the person you were talking to went and looked it up. That's one that I do think happens, which is not a conspiracy. That's just the way the technology works. But I think is one of the ways that it could trip people up. I find this to be somewhat of a fascinating thing, especially having conversations with people about this stuff. But as a technology enthusiast, sometimes it can be difficult because you end up being the one where people are like, why is my phone listening to me? And it's like, I can't help you, I'm afraid. But
Yeah.
Yoav, I hope that helped. If you would like to send in your questions for a future episode of the show or send us any feedback or follow-up, just go to upgradefeedback.com. If you want to check Jason's writing out, go to sixcolors.com. You can hear his podcast on theincomparable.com and here on Relay FM, where you can hear me too, and check out my work at cortexbrand.com. You can find us online. Jason is at jsnell, JSNELL. I am at imyke, IMYKE. You can watch video clips of this show on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, where we are at Upgrade Relay. Thank you to our members who support us at Upgrade Plus. Go to getupgradeplus.com and you can get longer ad-free versions of this show every week. And thank you to our sponsors, Uni, and our friends over at Squarespace. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next time. Until then, say goodbye, Jason Snow.
Goodbye, Mike Hurley.